Thank you.
Hi, Lauren, it's Troy. Go ahead and bring that back up and put it into the slideshow.
Okay.
We saw the whole thing. That looks good.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'll give you the ball and I'll give it back in a little while.
Okay. Thank you. I don't care. Are you still getting?
Hello, this is your host, Troy. I see Clint Waldron just joined. Clint, do you want to unmute and test your mic?
Yep, this is Clint. Is everything working?
Sounds great. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Lauren.
Good afternoon. This is your host. We are live and recording.
Good afternoon. Call to order the Tuesday, January 5th, 2021 Board of County Commissioners Special Public Hearing. Would you please stand and join us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. We do have a full quorum. All three board members are present. We are both in the room and online for our virtual meeting. Mr. Ingalls, do we have certification of our agenda today?
We do, Mr. Chair. This item was properly noticed prior to the December 8th, 2020 hearing, and it was properly continued until today. With that, you have notice and jurisdiction to proceed.
Thank you, sir. And do any commissioners have any disclosures for any item on our agenda today?
I have none, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have none, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have none. So to bring us up to speed where we were, we had heard this application and had continued it to today. We had closed public comment and we were in deliberation. At that point, the board had questions regarding the application, and the consultant, Mr. Mann from Ehlers, was directed to meet with the applicant regarding some concerns. Mr. Mann has done that, and has provided the board a document, which we all have. Mr. Ingalls?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. That document has just been uploaded by staff into the system, so it will not need to be added by your clerk into the record. But that document, which is a memorandum dated today from Ehlers Public Finance Advisors, has been added to the record. With that, I would encourage you to reopen the record consistent with this new information. Allow certainly the applicant to address it and anyone else that may wish to, and then you can return to deliberations.
Okay. Very well. So with the advice from the county attorney, I will ask the board if they're acceptable to reopen the record and reopen public comment if there is any.
I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I am as well.
Okay, very well. Thank you, everyone. So, and I too. So we will reopen the record. At this time, I'll call Mr. Mann, if you would approach the lectern, if you would state your name, spell your last name, and your address for the record. Mr. Mann.
Jim Mann, M-A-N-N, 4700 South Syracuse, Suite 860, Denver, Colorado.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mann. And I think, and maybe let you go ahead and state as you choose, but we had asked that you would meet with the applicant. I believe you had done that. So you presented us with a memorandum.
Yes, you had asked for some additional information because in our analysis, we had raised some concern whether at the end of the day, in looking at the, not the necessarily mandatory disapproval criteria, but these permissive disapproval criteria, we raised a question of whether the Metropolitan District Amendment, Service Plan Amendment, would be in the best interests of the future residents. We went back and worked with the proponent and proponent's counsel. They provided us a fair amount of information regarding the impact of the cost of the additional improvements if they were not included in the Metro Service Plan Amendment, what it would mean to that cost. We also worked with Metro Study that did some of the additional market analysis work, gleaned some information from them in regards to the average pricing of housing in the county and what the impact would be, and then looking at what that would cause the average homeowner to have to incur an additional debt and whether they would still be in the affordability range in terms of being able to put down payments down on a home. It started to call into question whether that would work. And so following that additional information that we received from the proponent and the additional information we received from our work with not only Metro Study, but other real estate agents, we kind of came to the conclusion that the financing mechanism of the Metropolitan Service District is likely a more efficient way to get the improvements done than putting it back on the individual homeowners.
Very well. Mr. Mann, you summed up a lot of your memorandum, but I would open up to the board for any questions or comments for Mr. Mann.
Mr. Mann, thank you very much. I appreciated reading this memo. As I worked through it, it made clear your conclusion, and if I could just put this into the record, that if the service plan is not approved and the homeowners need to finance the infrastructure in this example, a 30-year mortgage, it adds to the cost for this process to get the infrastructure paid for by the end user of $4,720 a year. Whereas if it is added into the district, it says we anticipate that the annual tax burden would drop approximately $1,100. And therefore, how much would that be per year?
It washes out to be about an additional $3,500 a year to the individual homeowner, if all the costs were to be incurred and placed on the lot and home package.
So that's in the next paragraph when it says the resulting cost application would be that the average homeowner would end up paying approximately $3,600. So it would be more affordable for this board to approve the service plan so that homeowners could get into these homes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
Mr. Mann, thank you so much for taking the additional time to do the expert review that this board certainly relies upon. And my appreciation to the applicant as well for the process and giving us the opportunity to do our due diligence and make sure that we have that additional expert information. If I could just run through a brief battery of questions. So in receiving this memorandum from January 5th, 2021, which is today, this is your independently submitted objective criteria or objective conclusions?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And were you encouraged or influenced in any way to modify or change your conclusions, or is this your independent and objective conclusions?
This is my independent and objective conclusion.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Mann. And then again, just based upon the permissive criteria for us to examine the best interests of our citizens, our understanding again is your conclusion that based on your review of a number of items, including elasticity data, and I take that to mean the degree to which the change in price would impact the unit of sales, that it would be in the best interests of our citizens to approve the application.
Yes, and especially the future citizens, because when you look at the straight dollars to dollars, the placing of the burden directly, if the entire burden were to be placed directly on the future taxpayers, it would end up costing more money for them to finance through their mortgage than it would be over the time on the average priced home in the subdivision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mann. That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. I have no further questions. My question is answered, but you certainly have raised some very good points, which I really appreciate, and it'll bring actually a few other questions I will have for the applicant up.
Okay.
Mr. Mann, thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
This time, I'll ask the applicant representative to present to the board. And if you state your name, spelling, ... Thank you.
Megan Murphy, Megan Murphy, Whitebear Inkley, Tanaka and Waldron, 2154 East Commons Avenue. I am here with a whole team of folks, so depending on your questions, I might need to tag out.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Questions for the applicant?
I have none, thank you.
And I have no questions for the applicant either.
Ms. Murphy, thank you. So I'd like to just review a few things. Specifically, it probably is some review, but, and I've asked, Katie, I just tried to text you real quick for the criteria. You're working to put the criteria on the board for us. Okay, very good.
I also brought my handy book,
Oh,
if that's helpful, old school.
Good. I thought you might have it memorized,
Not yet, sir.
just
Give me some
location
time.
of where to go. That's amazing. I'm impressed you brought that.
Thank you.
So with the presentation of increasing the cost for the Metro District, and as we had this presented to us in 2016, I believe, that the idea, the number of lots haven't changed, but certainly the increased cost to provide the necessary infrastructure and services. Could you just go into a little bit, because we certainly can understand there's been a costing just over time, but also what you would analyze to say, why would it be such an increase, nearly a double increase?
Yep. So there's also Jeff French, our engineer, is on the online meeting, so I might tag him in. But just for background, remember in 2015 when the first service plan was approved, that was the best estimates of costs for that developer in 2015. Today, we've got more costs included, number one, because prices have increased, and number two, because we're providing more public improvements in that cost estimate. And Jeff, are you on the line and able to provide in more detail? You can hear me?
I am on the line,
Oh.
Megan. I think you summed it up pretty well. If the commissioners have any more detailed questions, I can try to answer them.
Mr. French, would you mind stating your name, spelling your last name and your address for the record, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. My name is Jeff French. I'm with Atwell, French. My address is 143 Union Boulevard, Lakewood, Colorado.
Thank you, sir.
Just maybe to supplement that answer, for example, in 2015, we only included, I don't know if you can see this, but here's the streets that were included in the dark line. Then if you switch to 2020, bear with me, it might be worth it. Here's the streets that are included. So there's significantly more costs included than there were in 2015. I wasn't even counsel to them in 2015, so I can't speak to the why about that, but it is more costs.
Very well. And Mr. French, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't really have anything to add. We prepared the maps back in 2015 and the latest maps, so what Megan showed you is accurate.
So with the increased infrastructure road network, would that mean that the Metro District would be responsible for those roads versus a road network presently would be somewhat almost individual and private ownership of roads?
Let me try to answer that and you tell me if I
Okay.
got it. So the roads have to be built either way. I think under the 2015 cost estimate, they weren't included, so they wouldn't be eligible for financing by the district. We're proposing to include them now, so they are eligible for financing for the district.
And then,
As Mr. Mann said, if they're not financed through the district, then the end user would end up paying some proportionate share of that cost because you have to have a road to get to your house. So it's
right,
going to get built either way.
and then probably maintain it. So in this situation, it'd be the Metro District would also be in charge of maintenance of those roads.
I cannot speak to that. That is a separate development process that is not what I do. That would be your development team, your county planners. I cannot speak to whether we will maintain the roads. That depends on your development agreement.
Okay. And I'll raise that question here in a bit with our staff.
Yeah, they might know or might know who knows the answer to that
Okay.
one.
And maybe we'll just address that right now. And Ms. Paulbert, Ms. Ryder?
This is Katie Ryder for staff. So typically, maintenance of roads is identified either in the service plan or not. Part of the operations and maintenance ongoing costs could include roads. It depends if they are going to be transferred to the county. And so that's determined at the time of the development application. So I don't know if that clearly answers your question.
It really does, because we know it's going to be addressed one way or the other.
Yes.
Okay, very well. Thank you. So Ms. Murphy, with the increased costs, are you proposing that there would, obviously, you've given a good explanation, but with the infrastructure and the services that provided, is there going to be an upgrade? I know you mentioned additional services, I understand that. Is there an upgrade of services? We know typical increased cost of materials, but are you going to say there would be an upgrade to the cost of materials, or was it that is not necessarily what's being proposed?
I can't speak to the quality of materials. That would be a Jeff French question.
Okay.
There's just, sorry, go ahead.
There was no change in the quality of materials. It's really just the additional roads and the increased costs in the last 5-6 years.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. French. Anything else you'd like to offer the board?
I would just like to offer a reminder that we're not proposing any changes to the mill levies. As Mr. Mann said, we believe the First Amendment is in the best interest of the taxpayers, the future taxpayers of Douglas County. And I have a whole team here happy to answer questions should they arise, especially the number folks. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. And I'll just ask one more time, any further questions for the applicant?
I have none, thank you.
And I have none, unless your folks disagree with Mr. Mann's conclusion.
All behind the mask eyes say they are in agreement.
Okay.
Very well. Thank you, Ms. Murphy. This time, we will open up this for anyone in the audience, either in the room or online, who would like to address the board regarding this application. Seeing no one in the room come forward. Ms. Dunning, anyone online?
Thank you, Commissioner. I have no hands raised.
Very well, thank you. So we'll close public comment on this application again. Bring it back to the board for any further questions, deliberations.
I do have a question for staff. So help remind me, when we did this on December 22nd, there was a discussion about the differences, or maybe this is the county attorney, between these two sets of criteria, 1 through 4 and 5 through 9. I can't tell if there is a word missing in the second sentence because the window for whoever's online is there. But maybe Mr. Ingalls, I should ask him, can you tell us the difference between those two packets? Oh, Ms. Taggart.
From the office. Okay. There is the first 4 approval criteria are what's considered mandatory approval criteria. So the Board of County Commissioners must be satisfied that evidence has been presented today and at the prior hearing on December 8th, I believe, that those 4 criteria have been met. And then the next 5 criteria are discretionary approval criteria. If you find that evidence has not been presented sufficient to meet those, you may disapprove the service plan, or I should say in this case, the First Amendment.
Thank you, Ms. Taggart. I have no other questions.
And just to add to that, these are all statutory. So these are not something that the county has determined are going to be mandatory and or discretionary. This is how the statute dictates it. So the first 4 are going to be mandatory in every case. You have a little more discretion in the remaining criteria, all based on statute and all based on service plans.
So is that sentence the same in both that starts with the board shall approve? Do you see where I'm thinking there might be a word covered up by that window?
I think we're getting so it's not, there isn't a word missing. The difference is the shall in the first section and the may in the second. That's the difference in the statute.
And to be clear, this is staff's summary of the statute. The criteria are from the statute, and so the shall and may are not critical to your deliberations unless you feel one of the first 4 have not been met.
Thank you, and I appreciate whoever moved that little window over, so for my own satisfaction, I could see it wasn't covering up any words, so thank you.
Well, again, my thanks to everyone for engaging in the exercise of reviewing the additional information. I guess for the benefit of board discussion, from my perspective, the approval criteria 1 through 4 have been met. Certainly for today's conversation, we are reviewing the discretionary criteria number 9, whether the district will be in the best interest of the area to be served. I do believe that that criteria number 9, although discretionary and permissive, is certainly relevant for our consideration today. I don't believe that this government in Douglas County is in the business of impeding business or supplanting our business judgment for that of others, or creating any sort of ceiling to profit. I think our hope as a board is always to allow businesses to thrive here, and they often do. Very familiar with the concept of legal waste, and certainly in the memorandum there's the comment that the previous developer did not include public improvements necessary to serve all the residential lots in the district. After 5 years, the property remains vacant and no development occurred. I think we're aware that the law doesn't favor unreasonable restraints on alienation and prefers highest and best use. So vacant property that's unable to be developed certainly would not be my leaning, even though that is not explicit in the approval criteria. I think it's also important to restate the value that metro districts provide to Douglas County in terms of affordably creating the bedrock for infrastructure to occur without all of that cost ultimately landing on our citizens. I think metro districts do an incredible service in providing those key elements of infrastructure. So for me, based upon the expert opinion of Mr. Mann and the memorandum we received today, that this application is in the best interests of our citizens, I would be in favor of approval.
Thank you. So I think back, because I was a member of the board when this was first presented, and to review the criteria, I believe at that time the criteria was met, and I still believe that today that those criteria were met with that application. However, I think the applicant has certainly brought forward very sensible and reasonable expectations and presentation of what should be considered. And there's a lot of things to consider, and you know, different materials. That's why I ask about materials and all, and what type of services would be sensible to have a viable, you know, development come forward. I think what the applicant has presented with to us is very sensible in the means of what we ask. I think last hearing we were going to get a little more into the weeds. Not that we can't get into the weeds, but when we come to the criteria, some of those weeds didn't matter, I'll put it that way. But I appreciate, Mr. Mann, in your meeting with the applicant and going over things further, asking more questions. But I really believe what we've honed down to is what this board needs to address in consideration of this application. So I believe what we've seen before us in approval criteria, not just the first 4, but all 9, I believe, have been met. So I'd ask if there's any further deliberation.
I have none. I'll just state that I believe that the first 4 have been met. I don't know that we've seen anything about a water plant or anything, so I'm not sure that the rest have been met, but I'm comfortable with the first 4.
I'm going to comment just on the water plan because it was what I understand the service provider would be, I believe it's a different name, but the Pinery would be the water service provider. And what we typically see is water service providers will provide a letter of service to us at the time when necessary. That's why I believe all 9 criteria have been met.
If there's no further discussion, Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to approve a resolution approving the First Amendment to the service plan for Cielo Metropolitan District, project file SV 2020-002.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. No further deliberation. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes. Congratulations, and thank you, everyone. And we appreciate the extra time that you have put into this to help us come to a clear decision. So appreciate it. Thank you. That concludes the special hearing. We are adjourned.